What's up, guys? My name's Jay, and welcome to the Zen of Story podcast. I love all things story, and as a story addict, I'll be taking a look at the greatest stories out there, whatever the art form or language, and examine why they work so well and how they've made a mark on our lives. So, let's see what we have today.
So we've seen the hero's journey work time and time again. In some of the most memorable stories ever told, we've seen the hero overcoming all odds, facing the most terrible antagonists, pushing through their deepest weaknesses, and finally emerging triumphant on their quest. And you know what? We love every second of it. We walk out of the movies or put down that book and think, wow, now that was a brilliant story. Some of them even change who we are, forever, perhaps. So, why does this happen? What exactly is the science behind this form of storytelling, and why does it have such a deep impact on our psyche? A lot of it boils down to our brain's hardwiring for storytelling. We're all social creatures by nature, and stories are those invisible threads that connect us all together. Stories at their core are a form of communication, and communication has for us as human beings been a major evolutionary advantage. It is our means of passing down information from generation to generation, important pieces of information about our environment, about the world we live in, about, most importantly, ourselves. You see, the more we understood, the more we wanted to share. The more we shared, the better our species fared. Stories became a pristine form of education, and human beings became addicted to this particular form of sharing knowledge and experience. But you know what's more interesting? Through a series of biochemical changes and neuronal activity, our brains literally undergo physical changes during a good story. So, what are some of these changes? Let's find out. So, we've all heard of hormones, the proteins in our bodies that circulate and exhibit changes in our physical and our emotional state. Out of these, there are some specific hormones that are released to a greater extent when we listen to or watch a great story. Now, before I get into all of that, I want to quickly tell you a short story. It's a story about Jamie. Jamie is a 15-year-old boy who is enjoying school, he's got great friends, and he comes from a middle-class upbringing. His father had left their family when Jamie was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, and his mother was Jamie's everything. She dedicates her entire life to Jamie and his little brother Ricky, who is about to turn 6 years old. One day, Jamie comes home, walking down the street, having said bye to his friends, and notices something odd around his house. There are a number of police vehicles surrounding his house, and the policemen are walking around. He notices a couple of his neighbors gathered around by the gate. Some of them have handkerchiefs, and they are wiping tears from their eyes. Jamie quickens his pace, his heart starts to race, his fears start to rise, and his palms start to sweat. He is now running, desperate to find out what had happened. It is now a year later since that incident. Jamie doesn't like to think about what he saw. He had held back tears at his mother's funeral, but he had controlled his feelings as best he could as he held his little brother close, who wailed uncontrollably. Jamie could not cry. He was using his every fiber of being not to do so. He had to be strong. He had to be strong for his little brother Ricky, who now needed him most. In the year that had passed, Jamie decided to leave school. It was far too expensive for him and his brother, and he had decided that Ricky was the one that needed to be put through school. He had worked out that if he worked on a farm nearby for a friendly farmer that he knew, and at a restaurant at night, he would be able to piece together enough money to buy him and his little brother food and clothes. He pieced together jobs in between as well, and in the little time that he had left, he helped his little brother with his studies as best he could. He had to at least try. It is now many, many years later. Jamie is running once again. Only this time, he is running towards his little brother Ricky. He finds Ricky at the base of the steps of Ricky's university and hugs him fiercely. Ricky has just graduated business school. The two brothers embraced, years of hard work, blood, sweat and tears culminating in this one moment of triumph. This one moment where they both could breathe. They both sighed in relief and they started to laugh. Uncontrollable. Ricky took off his academic hat and slapped it onto Jamie's head. And together the two of them walked to a restaurant near the university. Jamie's restaurant. They still continued to laugh as they did so, hand in hand. Now, as you listen to that story, your brain went through some changes whether you liked it or not. Our brains are always hunting for a particular state of mind, a state of sustained attention. It's a rare state our brains are in these days because we are showered with hundreds of distractions and stimuli, and our brains just can't focus on one thing at a time anymore. That's where stories come in, and more importantly, why stories need tension. It draws our brains into a state of sustained attention, and our brains release a hormone called dopamine when this happens. At the start of that story, when we found out that Jamie was running towards his home, desperate to find out what had happened, our brains had already become invested in finding out what exactly happened as well, because our brains are hardwired to reach answers. This tension of needing to find out what happened is a state our brains seek every day, and one it finds so organically in character-driven stories, ones often found in stories that follow the hero's journey. In the hero's journey, we find our protagonists in their ordinary worlds before they come across an inciting incident that draws the audience in to finding out what the protagonist is about to go through. Next, we find Jamie in perhaps one of the most difficult moments in his life. Everything has crumbled around him and he has to make choices that will define the rest of his life. During scenes like these, our brains release another hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone of bonding and trust. When we see someone suffer, or when we are helping another human being, or when we are sharing an intimate moment with someone, oxytocin is released in huge amounts, flooding our psyche with feelings of intimacy and of trust and of connection. You see, the same hormone that a mother releases when she breastfeeds her newborn baby is the same hormone released when we fall in love. And it's the same hormone released when we see Jamie in that vulnerable, tragic state at the funeral. We immediately connect with him and now want him to get out of that situation. We start to feel ourselves inside his shoes. We start to feel empathy. Now, it's not just the oxytocin that creates this feeling. Our brains also have a special group of neurons called mirror neurons. For example, if I had to do a dance step, my mirror neurons will be the ones firing. And now when I watch someone else do the very same dance step, those exact same neurons fire once again. They are the neurons of learning and of understanding, and also the ones that are involved with feelings of empathy. Over years, our brains have understood that through not just the experiences of our own, but also through experiences of others, through stories, our mirror neurons fire when we see another person or character in situations that remind ourselves of some of our own moments in life. We've all felt happy, sad, broken, fallen in or out of love. We've all gone through difficult circumstances, battled with addictions. We've all laughed with our best friends, and we've all ultimately cared for others. When we see characters going through the same thing, our mirror neurons fire once again, bringing to attention those moments for those characters. Why? Well, because we want to learn from them and understand what they did in those situations, because we see ourselves in those moments. In the hero's journey, our characters go through a multitude of difficult, challenging, even life-altering situations, and we, in the process, become heavily invested in them as they go through these emotionally charged moments of their lives. Through a combination of oxytocin and mirror neurons, we become immensely attached to these characters, sometimes even latching onto them as an extension of ourselves. And finally, the resolution, the final stage where Jamie and his little brother emerge victorious on the other side, laughing while they do so. Now, in a deeper narrative, the final resolution stage is obviously a one that is much more fulfilling, not just the quick short story that I just mentioned to you guys right now. But usually at this point, when we hear about the final resolution of a character's story, our brains release a vast amount of dopamine, and together with that also serotonin and endorphins. And these hormones, coupled with oxytocin, create a mix of euphoria-inducing feelings. Our brains, if the story is powerful enough, has by this time reached a state of focus and emotional investment from the first two aspects of the story, and now finally the payoff, a triumphant one, floods our brains with this hormone that leaves us feeling excited, full of meaningful joy and ecstatic happiness. Our mirror neurons fire once again in tandem with these pleasure hormones, and we feel ourselves feel that same euphoria that these characters are feeling. Our brains, needless to say, love this state of being. Because, well, if you think about it, it's a state we are always chasing every single day. Every moment of our lives, it's a state we always want, a state of pure joy. Maybe these stories provide us with at least glimpses of that pure happiness and fulfillment. Moreover, the hormones, dopamine and endorphins included, work on our pain-pleasure centers in our brain. The same centers that are activated when we become addicted to a drug or a habit, simply because it creates a state that literally shuts off pain momentarily and upregulates pleasure and euphoria. Which is precisely why character-driven stories, ones so often found in those of the hero's journey, become so addictive, and we keep searching for them everywhere we go. Finally, I'd like to touch on another group of neurons that get all excited during these great stories that we are heavily invested in, and that is a group of neurons called spindle neurons, and they can be found in our anterior cingulate gyrus and our insular cortex. You see, what's interesting about these special neurons is that they are found in a far lesser degree in our other great ape relatives. And the only other creatures who seem to have these special neurons are dolphins, whales, and elephants. These are also neurons involved in empathy, but they are more importantly involved in self-awareness. It is these stories that take our brains on a journey they love, to ultimately leaving us feeling very aware of our existence, of our life, of our time here on earth, and our ideas of what we want to do with our lives. The greatest stories leave us in that state of self-reflection, an evolutionary adaptation that propels us to become better human beings, and elevates our species to one that upholds the greatness of connection and love. So there you have it. These character-driven stories draw us in with their heightened tension and then make us deeply emotionally invested in the characters of the stories, triggering the release of oxytocin and the firing of mirror neurons to make us attached to these characters. And we start to see ourselves in these characters until finally, as we watch these characters overcome all odds, we feel a surge of euphoria and the story lingers in our minds for days, for weeks, maybe even years afterwards. As we continue to play out these characters and their lives in our heads, we attempt to understand who they are, and in turn, as an effort to understand them, we try to understand ourselves. This was the Zen of Story. If you want to see more episodes like this one in particular, let me know at zenofstory.com or alternatively on iTunes via the link in the description. Subscribe for more episodes on Apple Podcasts or Android. And as always, if you like this and you've got a great story, let's explore it. Cheers.